I spent a full month traveling through Vietnam, but there were a lot of mistakes I made, a lot of things I wish I had known, so I'm gonna share all that with you today. So let's start with the area of the country that you're realistically gonna wanna visit. And this is a tough one because Vietnam is really long north to south and there is so much incredible stuff to see. And I'm actually gonna recommend wanting to see all of it. This shouldn't be a destination where you're just trying to go for a couple of days and then hop to the next country. No, we stayed for the full month and I feel like we still didn't have enough time to see everything. So we started up in the north, up in Hanoi, and it was wonderful. Hanoi is a really unique city. I feel like the cuisine was best up north, or at least that's where I preferred it. It felt like you really entered the cultural immersion phase up in Hanoi. Things were just a little bit more chaotic than in other parts of the trip. And I definitely wouldn't recommend skipping out on Hanoi. I think it is a really special experience. But from Hanoi, a lot of people always ask, what about Ha Long Bay? Should I go to Ha Long Bay? Is it worth the hype? And do I need to go and stay there, or could I do a day trip from Hanoi? All great questions. I do think Ha Long Bay is definitely worth the visit. It is just an incredible thing to see. We did choose to do it as a day trip from Hanoi, and that worked out completely fine. We did one of those Airbnb experiences. I'll link it below. They're not sponsored or anything, but you can check out what I did. It did have an early morning start, and it was kind of an all-day excursion. I think we got back at 8, 9 p.m., but it was really nice in that they arranged transportation. We got to do kayaking, obviously out on the water, explored some caves, swim at a beach. It was beautiful. There was tons to do, and I felt like it was a really worthwhile experience for us, but I didn't need to stay in Ha Long Bay for a full night. Not to say that you couldn't. I'm sure there's tons to do, but for me, the day trip felt like more than enough. But the next place that I think should be on your radar is Da Nang. It's a completely different culture, really special, more of a laid-back beach type of vibe. It's a hard city to really put your finger on what is the atmosphere and what is the culture like, because during the day things can seem a bit empty, or at least it was for us, but that was because it was so hot during the day. But there was so much to see, absolutely stunning beaches. We found the food to be pretty good. There was definitely a digital nomad scene, folks hanging out around there, so it was easy to get around and communicate. I felt like it was one of the just most relaxed places in Vietnam, at least compared to a Hanoi or a Ho Chi Minh, and we really enjoyed our time there. Tons to do, but one of the things I do think is overrated if you are staying in Da Nang is the Dragon Bridge. If you look up the top things to do, everybody's gonna say you gotta go see the Dragon Bridge at night. It's gonna light up. It's gonna be this cool thing. It was totally fine. I do think there's some people online who are maybe hyping it up a little bit more than it should be. The market around it is really cool, and there is quite a crowd that shows up to go and watch, so it is fun being in that culture and just seeing how things play out. But the actual show itself, when the Dragon Bridge lights up and ends up doing the fire and water, it's nothing too crazy, so I think you could skip that if you're short on time. But one place that I wouldn't skip, if you do make it down to Da Nang, there's another place called Hoi An, and Hoi An is just a short drive from Da Nang. You could spend a full night there, or you could treat it as a day trip. Probably would be a spot that I'd recommend to stay at least one night, because at night that place really just becomes special, because that's where they do the lantern festivals, and you get to light your lantern, send it down the water. It's just one of these really old, historic, beautiful Vietnamese villages. Just a special type of feel that I think it is best appreciated at night. Really enjoy that and recommend there. And then the other big spot that everybody loves to go to is Ho Chi Minh, or Saigon, however you want to say it. Incredible city. It's kind of a mix between a Hanoi and a Da Nang in that it is more modern, but you still have the hecticness, just the bustling city. It is huge. There's so much to do, and it is its own culture, slightly different cuisine. It is really beautiful as well. Of the three, I enjoyed Hanoi and Da Nang a little bit more, but that's not to say that you should miss Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh is a great spot to catch a flight out of the country because it's one of the biggest airports. So I definitely would recommend seeing all three. The biggest takeaway there between all of those is just make sure that you either start north and work south, or start south and work north. And when you're trying to figure out, well, how am I gonna actually get to and from all of these big cities, you do have a few different options. There is a pretty robust bus system. Trains aren't the best, but what we ended up doing is actually flying. But don't make the mistake of thinking that the flights are gonna be super expensive. They're far more affordable than you probably think, and it's really easy to hop from one place to another. So start north, work south, or go south, work north, and you're gonna have a good time. But let's talk about the food, because a lot of people seem to be freaked out online of, okay, is the food like sanitary? Am I gonna get sick? How can I avoid getting sick on my trip? And those are all valid concerns, but to be honest, I didn't feel like I was any more like on guard or had to be on guard in Vietnam compared to some of the other places that I've been to. Now, I do move to a new country pretty much every month, so I am a pretty experienced traveler, but Vietnam really just doesn't stand out as one of those places where you need to be concerned. I think if you just take normal precautions, which is like reading Google reviews, right? Don't just go to a place and say, oh, this looks good, I'm definitely gonna try it. Just whip out the phone really quick, take a peek at the Google reviews. Locals and tourists alike will be really good at telling you, hey, I got food poisoning at this place. So I found that it was pretty reliable to just trust those reviews and move on. Outside of that, just a couple basic things that you can do. Definitely make sure not to ask for ice if you're getting a beverage. If you have the choice of bottled waters, always take that, obviously. And then just in general, pay attention to like who is eating at the place. Are there people that are eating? Do you see any other tourists? Is it a place that is kind of a ghost town? Avoid those if possible. But in general, I do think that the fear is maybe a little bit overhyped online. I wouldn't be too concerned about things if you take those normal precautions. But let's talk about some of those foods that it would definitely be a mistake not trying while you're in Vietnam. Vietnam is one of my favorite places in the world to eat. I mean, the food is spectacular, especially if you like spice, and you're gonna have to make sure that you get some pho. You should probably know what pho is. If you don't, do not pronounce it pho. That is a huge like red flag that, oh, this is a tourist. No, it is pronounced pho. It is wonderful. Definitely recommend getting some of that. Eat it as early and as often as you can in your trip. Another thing that is kind of specific to the northern regions, up in Hanoi, you'll find what they call like egg coffee. And think of it as like a thicker, kind of sweet, almost feels like a holiday coffee. And I know egg coffee sounds gross, but it's not. It is really, really good. You're not gonna be drinking them all day, like you probably only can do like one at a time, but it is something that is just really unique to the culture. And I tried that during one of my last days when I was up in Hanoi, and I wish I had known about that earlier. So now you know that. And then one of the best sandwiches, if you're looking for like street food or anything, is just banh mi. I mean, it's impossible not to go through a million sandwiches of banh mi. Like, it's just so good, especially if you're like me and you like the spicy stuff. And in a country where the language barrier is a little bit harder to work around, food is always kind of that like common theme where it's like everybody eats, everybody like recognizes a smile and recognizes good food from bad food. So don't be afraid to just sit there, sit on the streets, really embrace things. Like, it is a beautiful culture, and food is one of those ways to, from my perspective, best understand and just see the Vietnamese culture, because it really is special. But let's talk about some of those resources that I would have wished I had known about earlier. If you are looking for like transportation to and from the airports, Klook is a great app. I use them all over Southeast Asia. They are a little bit more expensive, like they're not the most budget option, but they are always really reliable. So I do recommend them. But if you're not going to and from the airports and you are looking for that cheaper option, there's an app called Grab, and Grab will do kind of a bunch of different things. Yes, you can sometimes like order food from it, like think about it like an Uber Eats, but you can also like hail a taxi or one of the scooters. Easy to get around, especially like when you're sticking within a city. But let's talk about one of the other really unique parts about the culture, and that is the scooters. And I know tourists get freaked out with these, so how should you interact with the scooters? How should you cross the street? How do you navigate all of this? I know this sounds weird to say, but just don't. Like, try as much as possible not to think about it, because what you'll recognize, especially after spending a long period of time there, is that the traffic just flows. The more that you try to avoid the scooters, the more difficulty you're gonna have. Let them work around you, because they know what they're doing, they're used to it. So when it's time to cross the street, just go, just cross the street. They will work around you, I promise. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't look both ways. Definitely do that, but you're never gonna feel comfortable doing it until you just do it. So just take that step. And another thing that I really wish I would have known about, this is one of my first mistakes, was ATMs. Normally, I don't think too much about using ATMs internationally because my bank works with most of them. That was not the case in Vietnam. In fact, there were only a couple banks that my bank would actually work with. So I was going up to ATM after ATM, decline. I couldn't get cash. I was running around the city. There were some horror stories around it. So the tip here is just call your bank ahead of time and ask, hey, with my debit card, which banks in Vietnam am I going to be able to go to and pull out cash? That way you can just Google those specific banks and those ATMs. That way you don't have any trouble getting cash out, because I did find that I needed cash a little bit more than in most of the places that I've traveled around the world. But let me tell you about my absolute biggest mistake. So get this. I was traveling from Indonesia to Vietnam. Everything was in order. Flights booked, hotel accommodation, everything was in order. Well, I applied for the visa about a week beforehand because it says it's going to be about a 3-day visa processing time. No issue. Well, what I didn't check was the national holiday calendar and realized, oh no, a couple of these days are national holidays plus weekend, and they weren't processing visas over that period of time. So it turns out I show up to the airport getting ready to get on my flight, and there's nothing I could do. The visa hadn't come through, and I was stranded, and I had to leave Indonesia that night. That's how I ended up in Malaysia for a couple of days, and it delayed the start to our Vietnam trip. Definitely lost some money on that, and that was all completely my fault. So avoid making that same mistake. Make sure you're not putting yourself at risk for delaying or missing your trip altogether, because that would be a huge mistake. Vietnam really was one of my favorite places ever to visit. Such a cool experience, and I highly recommend you go. So I hope all of this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below, and we'll catch you guys next time.